Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team. And how wonderful it is that we actually have a panel dedicated to gender equality when we're looking at finance. So really, really excited to be here. And yesterday, just before we got to have a drink, we had the regional minister of the Government of Catalonia, who stated really, really strongly that considering gender equality is no longer an option. It's an imperative. And so thank you to everyone who clapped when that happened, because I think that's a really, really important thing that we have to look at moving forward. And we really want to thank everyone for bringing this to the forefront and actually having a dedicated panel on this as well. Sometimes gender equality is an add-on, but we know now we can't do that anymore. It has to be considered across all themes and all financing strategies. We also know that finance obviously is critical to achieve gender equality. And we know this for all the SDGs. And we know also that many countries have gender action plans or national development plans with gender priorities, but we also know that the majority of these are not budgeted for and they're not funded. So we're not seeing the outcomes that we actually want to see. And as we heard from our panelists before as well, it's not about the funds available. The funds are there. It's how they're allocated. And we really need to see more of these funds allocated towards gender equality. But we want to shift the dynamic as well and look at how gender equality is also critical for governments and all stakeholders to actually achieve the SDGs and financing goals. And we're going to hear about this today. We know that if increasing tax revenue is a priority, gender equality is absolutely critical through progressive taxation or acknowledging that the majority of the informal economy are women business owners. It's something we really need to consider, and we're going to hear from our panelists from Nigeria about this as well. A number of panelists from yesterday and today have talked about the increase in investment needed in the social sectors, including panelists from Zambia yesterday, and highlighting that there's multiple crises that we're experiencing at the moment. We know this, and there's a critical need to increase the investment in these social sectors, including education and health. We had the panelists from Maldives today say this, and it's absolutely true that women and girls are not only disproportionately impacted during crises, but each of these areas that we look at, education and health and the MSME sector, they have really unique gender considerations that we really need to think about if we want to have a sustainable impact from investing in these. Our panelists from UNICEF yesterday highlighted we're not investing enough in the social sectors. So thank you for that. We need to acknowledge that as well. Quickly looking at private investment, our panelists from Gambia as well in the previous panel highlighted that political instability limits securing foreign investment. And there's a growing body of research that's actually looking at the link between the rates of increasing gender-based violence and political instability, and the risk that foreign investors are seeing in stopping them from investing in these countries. So again, a really strong link between gender equality and investments. McKinsey, we're expecting by 2030, women in the US to control over $34 trillion worth of investable assets, which is around 38%. And we're seeing family offices increasingly being headed by women and being the decision makers around the allocation of capital. And women will allocate capital differently. They will ask questions around gender equality, and we need to be aware of that. And we see institutional investors as well increasing their focus on gender and actually putting elements into their investment criteria. And we're well aware of this. So we're moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. And we really need to amplify and accelerate this. We know that gender inequalities exist. We're not going to talk about that today. We are across all of our countries, we have different levels of inequalities. But what our panelists are going to speak about today is what they are doing about this, that it is not difficult to do it when you're intentional about looking at different strategies and different interventions and actually addressing how they're going to target different inequalities. So, at first, I'd love to turn to you, Dr. Onunuga, from the Federal Inland Revenue Services of Nigeria. Welcome, and thank you so much for giving us your time. We've worked extensively with with UNDP, and you've done some really interesting things within your institution and also using the INFFs, and we'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more about this. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Manita. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to talk about what the Federal Inland Revenue Service is doing towards gender equality, building a more gender equal institution. But first I'd like to say thank you to the organizers, to UNDP, and for the invitation and the platform, and the INFF for inviting me to talk about what we're doing. And also thank you to the governments of Spain and Catalonia for kindly hosting us today at this event, this two-day event. So before I go into details about what FRS is doing, I would like to just briefly talk about what, Nigeria and INFF, where this is all coming from, So, as you know, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. It has a very large economy. We are, I think, number 3. We just fell from our position, number 1 position, and now overtaken by South Africa. The South African economy is the largest in Africa, but we still remain the most populous country in Africa with a very fast-growing economy. So, but like many other countries, we run into issues because we are oil producing, and when the oil prices crashed, Nigeria had very little financing for government initiatives and to fund government projects. COVID-19 also, when it happened in 2019, 2020, didn't help matters. So Nigeria found herself, just like many other countries around the world, in a position where we had to explore other avenues for funding our development projects. So so this necessitated a lot of economic and tax reforms, which are still ongoing, in order to fund our initiatives. And in line with the focus, which was, we had the National Development Plan 2021-2025 National Development Plan, the government, with the support of UNDP, began developing an INFF. This was the origin or the beginning of our collaboration with the INFF to improve our SDG financing without increasing our borrowing. So the INFF provides invaluable recommendations to Nigeria on how best to expand our development financing through key strategic reforms covering public and private finance, thereby strengthening our nation's commitment to meeting the financing needs of the National Development Plan and the SDG goals by 2030. As a champion, well, one of the things that Nigeria hopes to achieve is to provide peer countries with a robust example of a financing framework that aligns policies with sustainable development, especially as it aligns with the President's renewed hope agenda. It is against this background that the Federal Inland Revenue Service, which is the foremost tax authority in Nigeria, In Nigeria, we run 3 tax authorities, the local, the state, and the federal. And the Federal Inland Revenue Service is the foremost tax authority because we collect the federal taxes like the petroleum profit tax, the company income tax, and the value-added tax. So we embraced the SDG financing of gender equality interventions as an institution and are leading, in this area. So far, back to answer your specific questions on what we've done, we have subscribed to the Gender Equality Seal of the UNDP and carried out a self-assessment and are working through the checklist before we invite the UNDP to come back and assess us. So hopefully we will get the gold or platinum, or at the very least a silver seal by the time we invite the UNDP to come back. We've introduced the sexual harassment and gender-based violence policy in 2024. We are collaborating with the Policy Innovation Center to support FRS in integrating gender policies into human resource policy framework. So the major challenge around introducing the sexual harassment, gender-based violence policy is trust. The victims who are women need to trust that the cases will be treated with confidentiality. So we're working on sensitizing and ensuring that we build that confidence in them to be able to come forward and actually make use of that policy. To combat that to some extent, we've dedicated a line straight to the Director of Human Capital Resource Management so that she is responsible for actually dealing directly with working directly with the victims to when they come forward to make reports. We're also working on sensitizing the staff of FRS across the nation to become more aware of what the institution is actually doing, or this policy. We've activated the persons with disability policy and we are in the process of building a database so as to inform our interventions as an institution or support required to promote inclusiveness for persons living with disability. At the moment, I'm just pleased to report that for the first time, during the ongoing promotions exams, persons with disability have been catered to because this has never happened before, but we've now just, introduced that in this 2025 promotions exercise so that they are given all the support that they need, Then one of the other things that we've done that I'm really I'm proud to report is taxpayer outreach targeted towards women-owned and women-led businesses. Well, research shows that women businesses are more compliant, and all they need is for the proper tax education to close that knowledge gap of what is required, and they would comply. Unlike men-owned businesses, which research has shown that are more resistant or non-compliant to taxes. No offense intended. But so we are working around this since it starts with the registration, so we need to get the data gender-based data on women, on businesses. All businesses are registered for taxes in Nigeria. So we've started this by getting an approval to do a modification on our tax registration platform, tax administration platform, to include this gender data in our database. So we're also working in collaboration with the Corporate Affairs Commission that does the company registrations to ensure that we align, and because our databases are linked, so we align, and then, we now have a standard database of gender disaggregated data. We also introduced the paternity leave policy to encourage men to take time off to support their spouses after childbirth. The challenge is that cultural orientation in Africa and in Nigeria, most men don't think that there's a need for this. So there's a lot of sensitization that is started happening and has to continue happening to encourage men to actually take that time off and make use of that policy, what is there, and we are creating the awareness. Then we established a gender desk and appointed a gender desk officer to attend to gender issues. And we also have launched the gender subject matter experts. We have about 10 of them. And we also have gender champions across the nation. We have 90 of those appointed as gender champions. The idea is that because the service is we're spread across 36 states and the federal capital, that's 37 territories. So we needed to have champions who would champion the cause in every part of Nigeria. So I think I'll stop there for now, and maybe I can come back to some of these areas later if there are questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ononugu. Yes. So commendable, and a really great focus on institutional reform around gender. And we were talking earlier that it's really important to look at that, because ultimately that is going to result in higher tax revenue, which we're looking for as well. Thank you so much. We're just going to go online to Comoros. Dr. Mohammed Soidiki, I just want to check, I know you're online, if you can please come on. Wonderful. We can see your screen. Can you hear us? Okay, Mr. Soidiki? I might ask you the question. Okay, we can't hear. Can you try speaking again? I know we did a sound check, so I know it's working. No, we can't hear you yet. Can we try one more time? Otherwise, we might move to the next panelist while we fix the connection. Oh, you have to unmute. We still can't hear you. Okay, we might move to the next panelist online. Director Mylene Lebusa.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear
Hello.
me?
We can hear you loud and clear, Director. Thank you so much. You're not coming up on our screen, but I'll let our technical experts work on that, but we can hear you. So, Director Labusa from Lesotho, we know Lesotho has a gender and development policy, and your ministry has been working extensively over the last few years on a number of gender equality initiatives within your ministry. Can you please discuss the gender responsive interventions that have been implemented or you're planning to implement, and also if there's been any challenges you had to overcome to actually get this work moving? Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Let me start first by expressing my gratitude to the moderator, Manita, thank you, and the UNDP and the INFF facility for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you all the progress Lesotho has made, as well as the challenges, as you have alluded to, Madam Moderator. In Lesotho, gender-responsive interventions have become central to addressing the socio-economic challenges that are faced by women and marginalized groups. And this has been dealt with by the government and various organizations, basically to promote efforts that will address the gender equality and empower women in that. We started the INFF process in 2021, and we started by carrying out the development finance assessment, which was launched in 2022. This process covered a number of areas, but it also helped us to identify and address gender-related issues.
Director Labusa, sorry to interrupt you. Are you able to turn your camera on, please? So we can see you.
Are you able to see me?
Not yet.
Am I? I've done that. Are you able? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Okay, maybe just continue. That's fine. No problem.
Okay. But I have activated it on my side.
Okay, no
Maybe
problem.
it will come back.
Yes, if we can make it happen, we can make it happen. Please do continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. So with the DFA process, we were able to identify and come up with tools that will address gender-related issues. Because particularly in the area of access to finance, looking at women entrepreneurs and small businesses. You have already said that, the moderator, you have already said that you know that we have the national gender policy in place, and the country have also initiated to participate in the UNDP Gender Equality Seal for public institutions. That was done in July 2021. And we have carried out the gender audit so that we can start gender mainstreaming. This was piloted with 3 ministries, and we are looking forward to roll out this. We engaged the gender seal assessment to ensure that gender considerations are woven into national planning and budgeting. And we also initiated gender-sensitive budgeting and gender-responsive budgeting process. We have not finished it yet, but we have started the process with the pilot ministries. that is also to address the challenges that have to be faced by the public sector in terms of addressing the gender issues. So we have piloted that, and we are planning to roll it out throughout the ministries. And as I have said during the assessment process of the development finance, we identified access to finance as uh, one constraint that the, 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 the women and marginalized groups are facing. And the DFA recommended that the Central Bank of Lesotho should implement or come up with lending targets that will be specific for women, women businesses. That policy would help overcome barriers that have long hindered the growth of women-led enterprises and also align with the objective of the National Strategic Development Plan, which recognizes access to finance as a key obstacle to economic development. And I am glad to share as well that the Central Bank of Lesotho is currently developing the financial sector development strategy, which will enable policymakers and stakeholders to take a holistic view of financial development needs in the country with specific focus on the women and the youth. Another element that was identified during the DFA that will help the women and bring in gender equality is the improvement in the mobilization of remittances for development. And I think it is important for me to highlight that Lesotho is highly reliant on remittances, particularly from the migrant workers. I think I should also share that or remind the meeting that Lesotho is that country in the southern region that is um, totally landlocked in South Africa. So most of our remittances come from there. So the government has proposed a diaspora bond and a diaspora banking initiative to mobilize remittances for development that will be used to empower women and youth. I think most of the challenges that we face are around the issues of cultural norms and traditions, as some of the things you'll find that as women believe that certain activities would have to be done by men. And then the other issue is on limited capacity for gender mainstreaming. And I liked what Minister from Nigeria have said that they are working on sensitization and creating awareness around gender issues. That is also very important for Lesotho to ensure that these issues are really dealt with head on. And the insufficient funding and technical capacity, I've already talked to some of the initiatives that we are proposing to bring in resources to overcome these challenges. We also have to ensure stakeholder engagement, and this, I think, and this will be done by the leading Ministry of Gender to ensure that all stakeholders in the in the gender sphere are all sensitized, are all capacitated, so that we improve on engaging, we improve on addressing gender issues, we improve on addressing them, and we are in a position where we integrate them as in at our initial processes, like in the planning processes that our plans should be gender sensitive. I've already said we have undertaken the gender audit for the selected ministries. And yes, that's it. And I think another thing that I think I should share is that we have undertaken the SDG investor map. And while we were doing that exercise, we carried out the rapid response exercise, which was a sample sort of it was a sample within the 5 sectors that we think they have potential to create employment in a country. And the selected businesses, they were asked questions that were gender related, like how many women and youth are engaged, are employed in your system, and what positions they hold in these organizations. That's another thing that we have done. And that process have also helped us to identify other hiccups in the gender sphere. One of the things that we have identified is that we also have microfinance institutions that have to be strengthened. Currently, we find that these institutions, microfinance institutions, basically lend to the public servants, which is more like investing for consumption. Then the process of SDG Investor Map helped us to identify that, and we are intending to strengthen it by sensitizing the microfinance institutions and making them aware that they can invest in small, medium institutions and try to build in a strong monitoring tool, because you find that they are geared towards investing to this public sector because they already have a coordinated pool where they can regain back their money. But with these SMMEs, they don't have that. But we are trying to build on that they should look into that so that the micro lending can also benefit or take part or geared towards the development activity. And with that, we are also planning to have a private sector development strategy that will help to coordinate the private sector. And as we do that, we will be taking into consideration the gender issues so that these marginalized groups are well covered in that. So with the challenges that we have raised, and yeah, with the challenges we have raised and the solutions which we think will be able to address these problems, we are in a positive that all this will lead Lesotho to address the gender inequality that we are facing at the moment, and get to where all the marginalized groups are supported. With that, I thank you.
Congratulations, Director Labuza. That's a lot of work that you're doing at the moment. And, you know, we looked at tax, and we looked at now the work you're doing with budgeting and supporting the microfinance institutions as well. So we've covered a lot so far. We're having some technical difficulties with our panelists from Comoros. So I'd love to now move to you, Mr. Uy. You're the Executive Director of the Philippines Business for Social Progress, which you lead, and it's a very well-established NGO, 54 years old, so fantastic. And I love that when we spoke, you said, you know, one of the questions your organization is asking is what can the private sector do more to address poverty? So let's elaborate on that and your work. We'd love to hear from you. Over to you.
Thank you, Manita, and Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Mabuhay. Let me, for the next 7 minutes, let me talk about the Philippine context. Let me talk about what we've done so far, where we are. Let me also talk about what Philippine Business for Social Progress, PBSP, our non-government organization, is doing on gender equality and what's next for the Philippines, and maybe a window also into the rest of the global south. The Philippines is the country. The adjective is Philippine. The language and the people is Filipino. We are 117 million strong, scattered across nearly every part of the planet, and about 7,600 islands in the Philippines, depending on the tides. Our median age is anywhere between 25 to 26. It was 22 15 years ago, still a young population. Demographic dividend window is, however, closing. We only have about 25 years left to maximize our demographic dividend. We have to become far, far richer before we become much older. We are a low middle income country. Mathematically, we will probably hit upper middle income status by the end of 2025. But we are punching below our weight class. For the level of development and wealth and prosperity that we have been generating over the past several decades, we have piss poor outcomes in human capital development, education, learning, health, social protection. And I always, when I am invited to speak on topics like these, I always say there is a tale of two gender divides. So in the Philippines, the gender disparity in education is not what you think. Girls and women do far better in school, they stay longer, and they learn more. But those advantages in education and training don't carry forward into the economic sectors. Our female labor force participation rate pre-pandemic was always below 50%. Not to say that positive or a higher female labor force participation rate is always better. But considering the amount of resources our public sector, even private households, were devoting into education and training of women and girls, only less than half of them were actually participating in economic opportunities after. For men and boys, that's about north of 70, low 80s. Pandemic, post-pandemic, we're now at about slightly above half. Still well below where the boys and men are. And that challenge has vexed policymakers, private sector, for a long, long time. And these gender inequalities, women, girls, all other genders, and how they are relative to everyone else, drives a lot of our human capital constraints and difficulties. So where we are, Philippine government has invested massively in several public sector programs, conditional cash transfers, targeted to education, basic education, and maternal and early child care and development. There are also loans for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Over 1 million businesses in the Philippines, more than 99% of them are micro or small. And the MSME loans from government, more than 68% are accessed by women or girls. 1995, our government mandated that at least 5% of the budget should be allocated to gender and development. At least 5%, national, local. But the caveat is the end development in gender and development is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It has become a catch-all for everything else, not just gender. And then, some of you might know Philippines is probably a capital for NGOs, CSOs, not just in the region but worldwide. By most count, anywhere about 4,000 or 5,000 NGO CSOs nationwide, an alphabet soup of different organizations and institutions. But pre-pandemic, during, and even now post-pandemic, there has been a significant and sustained shrinking and erosion of civic spaces. That has not changed, even as we have emerged from the worst of COVID-19. According to the World Economic Forum Gender Parity Index, the Philippines ranked 25th worldwide last year. That's fantastic if you don't know that we were 16th in 2023 and we were as high as 7th back in 2016. And so that's the story for the Philippines. We've done SDG investor mapping as part of the INFF exercise. 12 investment opportunities have been identified, centering on healthcare, infrastructure, alternative energy, renewable resources, and so on. About 10 out of the 12 explicitly mention gender-related intersections and opportunities. But that's not the focus. Just so happens that, hey, maybe gender can be included here. For Philippine Business for Social Progress, we started in the early 70s, 1970, 1971. I have 265 private corporations, mostly as my members, local and multinational corporations. We were founded December 1970. Private businesses asking themselves, what can the private sector do in the Philippines to contribute to poverty reduction and social development? We were gender blind for an embarrassingly long time. I have 21 trustees in my board. As recently as 2017, only 2 were women. Only 2 were women. When I became executive director in 2020, during the pandemic, the organization was desperate. They had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find me. There were 4 women out of 21. Today, proud to say, 75% increase, 7 out of 21. But my board of trustees, they represent the titans of Philippine industry, chairpersons, presidents, CEOs. I cannot squeeze out of a rock if the rock doesn't have enough women or girls, unfortunately. So 1/3 is pretty good, but nowhere near gender fair nor gender equal. We have done a lot of programs that have intersections also in gender. Over the past 5 or so years, a lot of push has come, in fact, from multinational corporations and large bilateral and multilateral partners, the ones that push gender diversity, equality, or equity and inclusion. I'll highlight 2 things quickly. Our second largest program over the last 5 years is a program supported by the Canadian government to capacitate and empower and enable women's rights organizations and networks in the country. We've assisted over 60 of these organizations and networks over the past several years, making sure they do the necessary work from service provision to subnational and regional policy making, also ensuring that women are able to participate in economic opportunities. Another one I'd like to highlight, we have what we call a Nanays in IT program. Nanays is the word for mother, the Filipino word for mother. And these are women who have graduated college but have been out of the workforce for 5 years or more, and now they're getting training in Python, in machine learning, in cloud computing, in web programming, supported by Accenture Philippines, the global IT giant, to make sure that they're not just reskilled but upskilled to participate in a generative AI future or present. And that is what's next, I think, for the Philippines. We have many crises in the Philippines, unfortunately. Our nutrition crisis, 26.7% of our underage 5 kids are stunted. Far, far, far worse than countries of our similar development are experiencing. Our learning gap is 5.5 years in basic education. Someone who finished K to 12 has the equivalent mastery of someone who finished grade 7 or grade 6. These are 2 crises that constrain the capacity of Filipinos. Our human capital index is only 0.52. A typical Filipino would only realize 52% of her or their potential. It's criminal. It's criminal. And in PBSP and other like-minded institutions and individuals, we would like to say that it's future forward and fairer. That we have to rebuild our institutions, business, governments, national, but especially local, and communities, stakeholders. Give the push, give the reminder that we have to do far, far better and far, far faster for the majority of people. Let me end by saying that the future is neither she nor they, because the present is. Maraming salamat. Gracias.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, you covered so much, and I could see everyone, nodding. So your energy was palpable. Thank you so much. I just want to check if our panelist from Comoros is able to join, or if we should move to the next part. Mr. Soidiki, are you able to join? Were you able to unmute? I know you were having some technical difficulties. Okay, if we see him pop up, we might go, but we wanted to give the panelists the second opportunity to speak, and really this question is around the future. I know you've touched a little bit on this, Mr. Uy, but we're really going to look at the zero draft of the FFD outcome document. And for those of you who have read it, fantastic, but there are some really strong gender-responsive priorities and commitments, including the list that I'm going to share with you. And I think for me, when I looked at this, I was just amazed at how many we were covering. So the priorities and commitments listed in the FFD outcome document are around mainstreaming intersectional gender equality into fiscal policies and development financing, which we heard about, increasing investment into the care economy, promoting gender-responsive budgeting and taxation, developing gender-inclusive investment products, strengthening the collection of sex disaggregated data, and achieving gender balance on executive boards. So these are front and center, and this isn't comprehensive. There's a lot more in there. So considering these with 2 minutes, and I am only going to give you 2 minutes because we will wrap up, and if our panelist from Comoros is on board, we'll go to him after this. But considering this and following what you've heard from the panelists so far, yesterday and today, looking at what the INFFs have supported you to be able to do, what are some of the future policies and reforms or projects that are important for you to consider?
Thank you so much, Anita, once more. I think for me, as Director of Taxpayer Services at the Federal Inland Revenue Service, I'm passionate about tax for SDGs. I'm passionate about taxpayer education for women-owned businesses because I see that as a very quick way to expand the tax net and increase tax revenues for the government. Like I mentioned earlier, we already know that research says that women are more compliant. So I think it's something we can explore by just going in there with the right taxpayer enlightenment and education to give women-owned businesses the opportunity to actually comply and increase our revenues quickly. So also getting support for women in the informal sector. Nigerian economy is made up of 80% informal sector, 20% formal. So if we get the data, like I mentioned, we are already in the process of modifying our tax administration system, the registration process, to get that gender disaggregated data. So when we get that data, then we can go in and also try to give a digital identity to the women who are in the informal sector to just move them from informal to formal and make them part of the formal economy and, of course, increase revenues that way. So my future, 2025 and beyond, I'm looking to accomplish this through more intense and more tailored taxpayer education and tax clinics. I've already introduced themed tax Thursdays. This means that It's a special day, one day in a month that is focused on our taxpayers, and putting a theme to it. I said, okay, so all tax offices across the nation addressing women specific issues, related issues on that day, once a month, so it's centered around women-owned and women-led businesses. So that was well received, and going forward, we'll be looking to do more of that, as well. So I mentioned earlier, we're already trying to mainstream gender equality into our fiscal policy. So that will continue. We will continue to look at avenues where we can do more of this. Then we would also look at women-focused tax incentives for women in business, so that we can build that into our tax laws and have rebates and incentives or exemptions to encourage women in businesses. Then
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in 15 seconds.
So finally, we will continue to strengthen our collaboration with other stakeholders, such as the Ministry for Women Affairs in the country, to see how we can work together to, on gender responsive policies and activities. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and amazing to see. And I'm sorry I had to wrap you up, but
That's
we just
okay.
want to make sure. Director Labusa, if you're online, I'd love to get maybe a minute and a half, because I'm really pushing it, of what's next based on the FFD, the zero draft FFD outcome priorities that we talked about. What's next for Lesotho?
Thank you. I think what's next is to finalize the INFF process. We are at a stage where we have to do the integrated national financing strategy that will ensure that we achieve the SDGs in the last term that we are in, and then ensure implementation of the national development plan, and also complete the gender audit and build on the capacities. While we are building on these capacities, one of the areas that are really identified in the FFD is to strengthen the science and technology and innovation. This is a tool that these two groups, women and youth, and other marginalized groups really need to really take a meaningful role in the development agenda. And also the issue of data and monitoring, it's really important. It's really important. So if there can be an investments in these areas, they will help us to really realize help us realize meaningfully the role that or our efforts in terms of improving gender issues we have really realized.
Thank you,
Those are the areas that we will do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Labuza, and wishing you all the well for that. And everyone in the room here will support with everything as well. Mr. Uy, over to you. 2 minutes, 1.5 to 2 minutes.
I'll be quick. So in 1985, during the last authoritarian government of the Philippines, our poverty rate was nearly 50%, about 48, 49%. Now, the latest data is we're at 2023, we're at about 15.5% in poverty. So the country has done fantastic in terms of reducing poverty by our definition. But inequality has been pretty bad in the 80s. It was starting to get better pre-pandemic. Pandemic made it worse, and it hasn't really quite recovered since. And when World Bank, for example, studied this issue back in 2022, one of the 3 major areas they highlighted was about the inequalities for women and other gender. If the Philippines can maximize its vast human capital, its vast human wealth, women and girls translating what they've learned in the formal education sector, contributing more to our economic sectors, that would do a lot in terms of building or raising the lot for a lot of Filipinos. And government has tried over the past several years and decades. I myself, I worked for the government 2 presidents ago. I was with the Ministry of Education, and we were part of the team that finally welcomed a 12-year publicly funded basic education system into the Philippines. Previous to that, it was only 10 years for public basic education. And there's a lot of things that government and private sector are trying to do, addressing malnutrition, addressing learning and education challenges, making sure there are clearer pathways for women and girls into formal workplaces, or even being able to reskill and upskill people. So you might know that we are quite dependent on the IT business process management sector. Us, Philippines and India, those are the top 2 giants in the world. And AI will disrupt, is disrupting and will continue to disrupt that sector, plus a lot of people. So while millions of new jobs will be created, millions of current jobs will also be affected. And a lot of women and girls, similar to climate change, similar to pandemic, now because of technological disruption, these will have quite a long-lasting effect on our communities. So twofold, I think government is trying to broaden the net to catch those who fall behind or fall out, and then government and the rest of the country is also trying to prevent much more from falling further. So it's exciting times, but it's also quite perilous period for the Philippines, much as everyone else in this room.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm very sorry, we've run a little bit over time, so I don't think we have time for questions. And apologies, I know I would have loved to get some questions and comments from the floor. But for now, I think we looked at why institutional reform is really, really important, as well as looking at tax policy reform and looking at gender-responsive budgeting as well. Colleague from Comoros, apologies, we couldn't get him online, but they're also looking at tax reform at the institutional and the policy level as well. And then, a lot of the things that you covered around really targeting those segments and working with the private sector and government, and the importance of the CSOs working with government in enacting these change. Please, everyone, can you please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists today? Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Manita, and thanks to the panel. I like